Queen Victoria may not have been a cat, but you could say she had 9 lives, surviving 8 assassination attempts. The thing is, these would-be assassins were not exactly master criminals. From miserable teenagers, a disenchanted poet, and one man armed with tobacco. So what drove these men to try and take out the Queen? Why would Victoria use herself as bait to lure out one of her attackers? And what did she eventually die from? After losing yet another job due to his bad behaviour, rather than, looking for another job, Edward Oxford bought 2 pistols and drew up plans for a fictional revolutionary group. He appointed himself as leader, as you do. On the 11th anniversary of his father's death, he waited on Constitution Hill, where Queen Victoria and her husband, Prince Albert, often took their evening carriage rides. When their carriage approached, Oxford stepped out, aimed, fired, and missed. Then, just as the crowd breathed a sigh of relief, he drew a second pistol. The Queen ducked, and Oxford was tackled before he could do any real damage. When asked his reason for attacking the Queen, he said, "Might as well shoot her as anyone else." Now, most people would probably lay low if they knew an assassin was out to get them, but not Queen Victoria. In 1842, she decided to use herself as bait. On the 29th of May, John Francis decided it was his turn to take a shot at the Queen. But his gun failed. He fled into the crowd almost unnoticed, but Prince Albert had seen him. Despite the danger, the Queen was not put off and insisted on going out again the next day as usual. This time, undercover police officers were sprinkled among the crowd, waiting to see if Francis would make another move, which he did. This time the gun went off, but he missed and was immediately arrested. Francis narrowly avoided the death penalty and was instead sentenced to life in Australia. Back then, Australia was the go-to destination for criminals, from petty thieves to failed assassins. Victorians used transportation to Australia as a way to get rid of undesirables from society by sending them away. But it wasn't a relaxing holiday, more like hard labour a long way from home. Now for one of the more bizarre assassination attempts. Just 4 feet tall and suffering from a spinal deformity, John William Bean had faced cruelty and discrimination his entire life. Unemployed and desperate, he lashed out, perhaps hoping for the chance of an easier life under care of the state. Bean attempted to shoot the Queen with a pistol, loaded not with bullets, but with tobacco. Bean clearly didn't intend to harm the Queen, but that didn't spare him from punishment. He was sentenced to 18 months hard labour in Millbank Prison. On the 19th of May, 1849, William Hamilton became the 4th man to fire a pistol at the Queen, and the 4th man to miss. Mainly because his pistol was only loaded with powder. Why? Well, rumours swirled that he was involved in Irish revolutionary politics, but it's more likely that Hamilton was just desperate. Like many impoverished men in Victorian society, he may have hoped that by getting arrested, he'd be taken care of by the state. His sentence was 7 years transportation to Australia. So far, all the Queen's attackers had come from the poorer parts of society and acted more out of desperation than malice, and none of them had ever actually succeeded in hurting Victoria. But all that was about to change. Robert Pate was an ex-army officer and a regular sight in the royal parks. His father was a wealthy gentleman. Nicknamed Mad Pate, Robert would march around the parks in a peculiar manner and was familiar to Victoria. She described him in a letter as making the point of bowing more frequently and lower to me than anyone else. On the 27th of June 1859, Queen Victoria was visiting her sick uncle, Prince Adolphus, Duke of Cambridge. As she was leaving his mansion on Piccadilly, her carriage ground to a halt. She faced what we might think of as a modern problem: traffic. Victoria loved an open-top carriage. She liked being seen by her public, but perhaps not at quite this close a distance. The crowd gathered around her carriage, out of which stepped Pate. He struck her on the head with his cane. Chaos ensued. Pate was arrested and sent to Van Diemen's Land, modern-day Tasmania. Arthur O'Connor's attempt wasn't as violent as Pate's, but it was one of the more politically motivated. While the Queen was out on a carriage ride around the royal parks, O'Connor got inside the gates of Buckingham Palace unnoticed. When the Queen returned, he pointed a pistol at her. He was apprehended so quickly, the Queen had barely noticed he was there. Arthur was an Irish revolutionary. He claimed he never meant to harm the Queen and had wanted to scare her into signing a document demanding the release of Irish prisoners. He was initially sentenced to 1 year in prison and a good whipping, but Victoria thought that wasn't punishment enough and petitioned to have him exiled to Australia. The eighth and final attack on Queen Victoria was the only one to be made outside central London, and was motivated by one of the pettiest reasons. As the Queen walked from the train to her horse-drawn carriage at Windsor Station, a shot rang out from the crowd. 2 boys from Eton School tackled the assailant and kept him restrained until help could arrive and he was arrested. When Maclean was tried, it became clear that he wasn't well. He believed anyone wearing the colour blue was deliberately setting out to annoy him. It was established that his most likely reason for trying to hurt the Queen was because of a lack of respect he'd received in response to a poem he'd sent her. It's quite likely the Queen never read his poem, and that the response he received was from someone else in her court. Very quickly, he was deemed to be insane and sent to an asylum, where he remained for the rest of his life. So despite 8 assassination attempts, Queen Victoria lived a long and eventful life. But how did she eventually die? Not from an assassin's bullet, but from a stroke in January 1901, after 63 years on the throne. If quirky British history is your cup of tea, check out this video about a bizarre libel case that inspired a movie, or this one on the London Necropolis Railway, a Victorian railway for the dead.